Hello everybody, and welcome to the 10th of 11 videos covering the first main story arc, labeled the Dark Seeker Saga, of the Kingdom Hearts franchise. As per usual, this video will be full of spoilers for every main game in the franchise before Kingdom Hearts 3 released, which is already available in Japan as of this video's publishing date. So we will be going forward under the impression that you are familiar with virtually every game in the series as of January 25th, 2019. Specifically, you should be familiar with these games: Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, Rechain of Memories, Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, 358 Days Over 2, Birth by Sleep Final Mix, Recoded, Dream Drop Distance HD, Unchained Key, Back Cover, and 0.2. If anything I said above means nothing to you, I have 9 other videos to help fill in the gaps at your leisure if you have anywhere from 1 to 24 hours of your time to not play the games but wish to be caught up, or to simply refresh yourself if it's been a while. And if you have watched any of these videos, thank you! We are right at the moment of truth and why I even started these videos, so I hope I helped clear up as much of this story as possible while inserting my thoughts on why I love this crazy crossover series. So as long as you are familiar with my previous videos or the 10 installments before Kingdom Hearts 3, then enjoy my slightly annoying voice for the next hour. I will be covering as much of the story as possible that was released before Kingdom Hearts 3 dropped. It is worth pointing out that this video on Union Cross acts as a part 2 of sorts to the 8th video I did detailing Unchained Key and Back Cover. This video will attempt to make that video way more clear with as much current hindsight as possible, so the usual timestamps are provided in the description as I briefly go over the context of this video as the final stretch of plot before we reach the epic conclusion of the Dark Seeker Saga. Also, Digital 5 to anyone who, like me, has avoided any Kingdom Hearts 3 spoilers if you made it through January 2019 safely, because I'll be damned if I'm going to get spoiled on this story when we're so close to a massive payoff. As I briefly detailed before, the tangled mess that is Kingdom Hearts Key is quite a doozy, and very Square Enix and/or Kingdom Hearts for lack of a better term. While I will stick up for the other 9 entries to various degrees covered in 1.5 plus 2.5 and 2.8, Back Cover tried to tell a standalone story to help set up the important past events that somewhat relate to Kingdom Hearts 3 alongside the series as a whole, which I will recap as we go along. It's very arguable that it wasn't successful in completely conveying the events of Kingdom Hearts Key, but it's safe to assume, fingers crossed, that what was shown in Back Cover will at least pertain to something Kingdom Hearts 3 covers. But I'm here to try and help digest anything and everything that I deem as important. So here, I will briefly dive back into the title in regards to being a video game as of January 2019. First up will be the game mechanics of the game that was once known as Unchained Key, and was then rebranded as Union Cross shortly after the release of Back Cover. I will not go crazy into everything here, since the nature of many smartphone games that are ever evolving, and there are plenty of other channels out there who can really go into proper up-to-date details on the meta, so this will serve more as a snapshot of how I felt about Union Cross up until the release of Kingdom Hearts 3, as this video will be more of a quick clarification and update at the Season 2 part of the story that Key covers. So with that, let's get into the gameplay details before getting into what juicy plot and lore bits this curiously split title has become over the last 5+ years. Side note, I originally thought that I would be stretching the retrospective part of this video's project's naming conventions as I finally reached the present with this video, but the word is defined as looking back on or dealing with past events or situations, while analysis is also described as a detailed examination of the elements or structure of something. So while I'm going to cover the last 6 years surrounding the entirety of Key's narrative up until the present, as of the end of January 2019, my title structures will still make sense. So onto the video at hand. No voice clips for section transitions this time, just me, game footage, and some music. The benefit of doing most of the legwork in a previous video means I can say go watch that and continue immediately into the gameplay of Union Cross thanks to already having explained the story and the resulting context 2 videos ago. In this case, the Book of Prophecy's ability to bestow Keyblade wielders with powers and abilities from the future. Contextually, this is how they can pull anything from the series and have it work in-universe, since it slots well enough narratively to inform the gameplay style and appears in gameplay as various moves instead of literally summoning, say, Master Xehanort and Naminé one after another for special attacks. These appear as medals of various rarities, which is where the gacha aspect comes into play. My advice: I've played by the last 2+ years if you're playing the game as a free-to-play title. Only go after banners that have mercy pulls, which guarantees the current special medal they're advertising. On average, it's been within 5, 10, or 15 pulls, each batch of 10 usually costing 3,000 jewels, which is the premium currency that can be earned through various means in-game or can be outright bought. Jewels are typically gained through normal story progression every few quests, as well as the usual daily login bonuses that these types of games have. There's always the extra events that occur to offer more if you don't want to pony up the dough, but for those who are only playing for the story, especially the longer you wait to get into the game, you won't have much of a problem thanks to the large pool and frequent guarantees of high-level medals. And because of this gameplay style, there isn't one set strategy for the bulk of the story, since any good Kyrie medal alongside a mix of powerful and varied medals will absolutely storm through the critical path on auto battle. The game is at its most strategic at the earliest point in the game, if you're still relying on the free medals until a difficulty spike halts your progress, with some minimal grinding, and also at the higher end of the competitive scene. The difference here is that the beginning is pretty much the same for everyone regardless if you pay or play for free, whereas the competitive scene is very, very pay to win, and is not recommended for the large majority of players. While the early game can be done through actual skill and understanding of the game, Union Cross's meta is all about luck and money. For your sanity, do not get caught up in trying to be the best. There will always be someone out there who's willing to outspend you to feel the best for a week's time. This is why I never actually covered any battle in the Unchained Key video, and will continue to not do so in this video. Time and better medals will make the story bosses trivial if you wait long enough, and this game won't be around forever anyways. In general, if you have a Kyrie medal, you're doing pretty well for most any basic quest for healing purposes. Most versions of the Redhead will carry you for quite a bit. Again, much of the strategy gets thrown out the window barring a few of the later encounters, so let me get back to addressing mechanics. Aside from the broader categories of upright and reverse medals, their rarities and rock, paper, scissors elements, they can be inserted into one of 5 slots on each Keyblade, alongside a 6th slot for friend medals to take into battle. Since then, Union Cross has added a 7th slot linked to a personal pet spirit for each player that corresponds with a related story beat later on. These Dream Eaters come in various animal forms, such as the expected dogs and cats, to the more varied rabbits, turtles, pigs, etc., and whose customizable details can be mixed and matched to various degrees. It's all cosmetic, of course, with various exclusive variants and accessories being offered in special limited monthly challenges. These pets can also be given gear in the form of medals to power up their levels, multipliers, and abilities known as tricks. Like Keyblades, they can be optimized automatically for those who don't feel like micromanaging your arsenal or pets alike. By having a potential 7 medals per player turn, it gives one a good amount of customization, especially with the various Keyblades dictating which types get higher multipliers. Each Keyblade allows for 3 different presets for convenience, and more Keyblades can be unlocked by going through Proud Mode, which generally give better stats than the early weapons. As stated before, each Keyblade can level up using various drops that get progressively more difficult and limited to earn as you improve them. Some of these materials, like Power Gems, can be bought in specific packs or earned through monthly challenges, or in the case of Proud Mode Keyblades, completing the objectives in the Proud Mode alternatives of story quests. Each sword has their own subslot that gives boost its multiplier via 7-star medals, so there'll be a luxury for most free-to-players. Not necessary for story, mind you, but it is for the more dedicated and hardcore of Keyblade wielders. The stats are the basics. Attack and defense are self-explanatory and are determined by medals and not levels, which simply help determine the friend medal pool selection and rewards a player with a refresh of AP and some avatar coins. Action points are the free-to-play energy meter that most quests cost to play, increased by using avatar coins on avatar boards. These are used to unlock various accessories for the player, as well as basic stat boosts for HP, AP, and cost, which help increase the Keyblade cost that limits a bunch of high-level medals from being equipped from the get-go without lowering their cost with Sid medals. A lot of these boards can be bought with jewels and can give vital stats via Scrooge medals that you can throw onto a medal when boosting their experience medals can also gain passive strengths when combining the same medals together. This sort of synthesis helps strengthen a medal's special attack bonus, or guilt as it's known in the superior Japanese version. As you level up a medal's rank, combining the same medals with each other or by inserting Mickey and Broom's boosters, they can gain dots. When a 6-star reaches a full 6 dots, it works with the power bangle given by the Dark Chirithy to players, enhancing their multipliers even further. Each medal is currently ranked from tiers 1 through 9, each determining their guilt/special attack bonus, the lowest being in the 10 to 25% range to a level 9's insane max of 280%, which really stacks up on top of a medal's damage multiplier. Power creep is a real thing here. Unlocking Guilt also gives players access and enhancements to Nova, an attack that can be used once per quest. It increases in level for every medal type that reaches Guilt and goes up further when it maxes out. Each one can only be done once and can be seen from the album which medals have already achieved this. It's nothing special on higher difficulties, but it is an extra attack that can be slotted in any time before the player's final medal in a turn. A more recent upgrade to this is the Supernova, another one per use quest attack given by Supernova medals. Only 11 were available at the time of writing the majority of the script in mid-January 2019, but they are pretty strong and thus only one is granted at a time. Rounding out most of the smaller details are the weekly rankings of Lux for each of the 5 unions. They're used to level up players, unlocking more avatar boards, and will generally be something most normal players won't go out of their way leveling up. Playing for story will serve most players fine. While this affects the bonuses given to all in a union, it also determines who can be in a party, so if you're playing with friends, agree on your union before you begin the game. Aside from the story quests, players are given the option of special and event quests, with the Colosseum serving as a PvE and PvP venue, where a special Union Cross mode is for limited multiplayer. Specials are the usual daily cycle of Sid, money, and specific Keyblade quests, to which an impatient player can unlock VIP status to access any quest until the next Sunday ends with no limits, including some VIP exclusive bonuses, which I really dislike. Events has a small tutorial, Proud and monthly gem quests, plus whatever current limited time quests are available. The usual stuff to keep players engaged. A lot of these modes have their own currencies for their own boards with other bonuses, so with all that done, I'm pretty much covered the boring pedantic gameplay details. The only other thing worth mentioning are raid battles, which are basically giant heartless bosses with way more health and targetable spots than usual. You'll run across them after defeating what seems to be around 82 heartless by my research. They're mainly how you farm Lux for experience and ranks, so if that's what you're here for, you'll become intimately familiar with them as your party seeks greater glory for the week. So what do I think about all this? First things first. While I find it charming that the game is using its storybook aesthetics to help drive the point home that we're playing in the so-called Age of Fairy Tales, I definitely would love the events of Kingdom Hearts Key, Unchained Key, and Union Cross to be remade into a coherent and complete 3D game when it's all said and done, since you could so easily splice in the events of back cover and expand upon them where appropriate here. Because the game is such a grind, it's too easy to get lost in the numerous filler quests between the meaty part of the adventure many fans deep into the lore and story are here for. That's not to say I don't enjoy the game at times. It's pretty polished, the presentation is nice, and there is a simplicity in what limited depth there is on display here in terms of Keyblade and metal selection, the variance between them, and when the story is happening. It can be pretty intriguing for someone who's been invested in the series. The problem comes with its execution in both narrative and gameplay, which each has their own part to blame to share on why this title is frustrating. First off, the gameplay itself is a gacha model, inherently revolving around the same gambling/psychological manipulation that loot boxes and microtransactions have been popularized first by mobile games and has since spread into console titles thanks to a few major successes. Its very core is enough for some to hold the game in contempt and stay away from it, and I can't really blame them. If you don't like gacha-style games that rely on either luck, patience, and/or a combination of those in its main pursuit of money, then Union Cross is likely not going to change your mind, even though I generally find its story quest path pretty fair all things considered, since by the time you do hit a roadblock that a new player's medals cannot handle, you will have a bunch of jewels to draw from a pool that's going to give them plenty of medals to brute force their way through eventually, if a player is careful knowing when to cash in on a pull or 10. That being said, while I haven't spent a cent on the game, it's one where I almost would have were I not fundamentally opposed to the model. I'm thankful that I can play Union Cross and feel I'm not being swindled or forced to buy jewels to get better medals in order to get through the main story quests, or worse, be top dog for a week. To me, that isn't fun or satisfying, given that these are all temporary digital senses of satisfaction that can largely come down to luck and or money spent, and I can see right through the intent to get money in this title. I'm generally stingy with the jewels, and the game gives a decent amount of them for a newcomer, and its AP meter doesn't make you wait too excessively in my experience, where I don't play longer than an hour per session anyway. But it still is a gacha-style smartphone game at its core, so I'm saying a lot of these positive aspects with a few major floating asterisks above my reluctant recommendation. As to how I respond to should I play Union Cross, it's determined by how you view video games, and Kingdom Hearts especially. Do you play this franchise for the combat? Or are you here for the crazy, convoluted, and confusing storyline? If you said yes to either, you may want to skip this one and just continue watching this video, or any others online who summarize the non-filler bits of the plot. If you like the gameplay of the main series, you may enjoy the simplified for smartphone controls here, as long as you aren't going in expecting a full 3D Kingdom Hearts experience. If you're new to the series in general, in which case why are you starting on this video, you may enjoy it, because it'll be your first experience. I find it charming in short bursts, but I am mainly here for the story and being treated as the 8th title in the franchise and how it builds the series' lore and sets up for what lies beyond the Darkseeker saga. If you have no patience for grinding and long treks through familiar-looking maps and even more recognizable enemies, then I can't recommend the game wholeheartedly, especially if you dislike gacha games and microtransactions. Keep your sanity and stay far away from this one. Again, I would love the full 3D treatment using the newer engine here, but that necessitates that the game be mostly finished. and at least for completed story arcs whenever Key's story eventually wraps up, and that would involve the extensive remodeling of the 2D areas in the game into a full-fledged 3D installment. It'd be on par with essentially remaking the entire game, as they would have to do for Days to Recoded, and actually did for Rechain of Memories, where they had to get the proper HD games that you can play instead of only watch, even though they have a good start on it thanks to back cover. A fan can dream, right? So in short, this game, full of dirty gameplay decisions that I'm fundamentally opposed to, especially in comparison to the other 10 titles which are full-fledged 3D games with actual story arcs, action-oriented gameplay, and the series' usual high standards of production values. It can be charming if you get into it and enjoy the combat for a time, and are curious about the story here, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not worth spending any more than $60 on the title full stop. I can't prevent anybody from spending their money how they wish, but when you can now grab the other 10 titles on PS4 for about $100, don't spend over what you can on 10 3D titles over one mobile game, please. With all of that out of the way, I can now mostly dive backwards into what the original Kingdom Hearts Key was about, as this is the point in the narrative where Unchained Key diverges from the story told in the browser game and enters its second season, rebranded as Union Cross. It's all story from here on out, so buckle up. Rewinding a bit, we now restart the story at the beginning, as it were. The original version of Kingdom Hearts Key on PC began pretty identically to the mobile incarnation, with the pop-up book with Kairu's grandmother narrating the story about the series' creation myth/history. Once again, all 2D footage in this video is thanks to Everglow's playthroughs of both Key and Union Cross, linked to his channel in the description, and a major thank you for being a boon to the community. Big fan, and I couldn't have done this video so quickly without his and others' help in recording, playing, and translating both the original game and the newest story cutscenes that the global version of Union Cross isn't caught up with yet. So let's run through this very quickly. In general, the story is pretty identical minus a few minor tweaks, mainly in pacing and how it tutorializes the gameplay, which is the skeleton of the gacha format the mobile game possesses. I won't spend too much time on the differences here since the game never left Japan and it's much easier to get into the smartphone version anyway, but I will cover my bases regardless. For starters, while the smartphone game uses medals, this was changed from cards and Key due to the understandable notion that many fans outside Japan generally have different connotations with card games. So to combat this due to initially negative first impressions, they changed the cards into medals to psychologically shift the presentation, even though it's not too different at its core. I understand that Chain of Memories isn't everyone's favorite game in the series, and the card aspect is a big part of that. As I've mentioned earlier on in this series, the games managed to reinterpret the concept of building a deck of moves into the command deck, receiving much more immediate and positive effects for many players. So I'm fine lore-wise with having medals to help differentiate the concept instead of using cards once again. The cards and keys still grant special abilities from the future, as linked with the Book of Prophecies anyway, so same thing really. So as expected, many of these systems are nearly identical across both versions. In the original, AP was still used to limit each action, such as chess costing 3 action points to open per click, potions restoring AP here, to each individual battle costing 2 AP, item pickups of 1 AP, etc. A synthesis system existed here as well, alongside Keyblade and card enhancements, teams to help tackle raid bosses, daily and weekly leaderboards regarding Lux and victories per union, the works. Very much the blueprint of the game Unchained Key would become 3 years later, much of which are introduced in the opening tutorial. For footage purposes, Everglow selected Leopardus as the union this time around, which again doesn't affect anything major in the story. Speaking of which, most of the story from the beginning of Key to the events covered in my Unchained Key and back cover video is virtually identical to each other, as previously stated. It's not until around that point in the narrative that the mobile game diverges from the PC browser title, and I will begin from this point onward in Daybreak Town, which will help begin giving some closure to the cliffhangers in back cover regarding the foretellers, as well as pulling the trigger on the hyped up Keyblade War the entire title was building up around that wasn't actually shown beyond the aftermath seen in 0.2. Let's get into some actual plot payoffs and consequences that were built up in the previous 2 titles, so I shall resume from where I left off in my previous video. At this point, virtually all of the Disney filler fluff, as I call it, has wrapped up in Key, setting the stage back in Daybreak Town when we seem to flash forward to the familiar Badlands in the apparent aftermath of the Keyblade War, with some ominous inner monologue from the player. Speaking of, the player and Chirithy come across 2 Keyblade wielders fighting each other in the oft-visited Fountain Square. Learning that they're from different unions, the 2 warring warriors are accusing the other of stealing Lux as Skuld arrives to help break it up. Before long, more Keyblade bearers show up to the scene, the atmosphere tensing up as accusations of traitors are thrown around, how stealing the light is no different than being a monster of darkness, and how the war has already begun. Entering stage left, Master Aced claims that one can only trust their own union, since they cannot determine who's fallen to darkness at a glance. He instead suggests that fighting over Lux is pointless, as light is not true proof of strength and that victory is the more accurate measure of strength. Saying a strong union is proof of justice, Skuld objects to the notion, stepping forward as the Ursa's foreteller recognizes her as one of Master Ava's dandelions. He accuses the action of the Volp's foreteller's forming of the special group as one of a display of strength, causing Skuld to falter for a moment. The player then interjects that they are not a member of the Dandelions, and responds here in Everglow's footage as a member of the Lepardis Union, when asked by the Ursus leader where they come from. The brash foreteller then challenges the player to combat, eventually causing them to fall down in exhaustion as Aced claims that they are disqualified as a Keyblade wielder. Before anything more can come of this, Master Ira shows up to stay Aced's blade further, berating his fellow Union leader's behavior at raising his sword against a fellow Keyblade wielder. While Aced claims that he was simply testing the player's strength, Ira counters this, saying he's only here because he senses Aced's bloodlust. The bear retorts that every union's gathering Lux in an arms race, insisting he is instead gathering more Keyblade wielders than anyone else for the inevitable war, explaining his challenge and deeming the player unworthy. Believing that the world simply needs one strong union with a singular leader, himself, Aced intends to banish his fellow foretellers, the unicorn rejecting his peer's aggressive notion. Allowing Aced to leave, the other wielders following suit, Ira is then asked by Skuld if it is true that the world is indeed nearing its end, as told to them earlier by Ephemer and more recently from Master Ava. Confirming this, Skuld reacts with worry when repeating what Ava said to the Dandelions, that there would be no winners in the upcoming conflict. Ira leaves the chair by warning the two wielders to prepare themselves, the player losing consciousness shortly afterwards. Apparently dreaming, the player sees themselves at the crossroads of what will be known as the Keyblade Graveyard, spotting various figures watching them from the shadows. Their silhouettes suggesting they are hooded, possibly in the black coats so iconic to this series, the scene then blacks out for a moment. The mysterious figures gone, the player looks up as bright light of what is assumed to be Kingdom Hearts shines down upon them before they regain consciousness in their room before they can name the phenomenon. Eyes still closed, the player overhears Skuld and Chirithy discussing the constant fights that are breaking out across Daybreak Town between Keyblade wielders, the atmosphere getting worse by the day. Questioning the rift in the foretellers, much of which was seen in back cover, Skuld is given the answer she suspects when Chirithy responds that events earlier pretty much confirms her suspicions. The translations here then has the Dream Eater responding with everyone being disconnected, the player opening their eyes and asking their friends about Ephemer. While Skuld hasn't found him, she does suspect that he is indeed working under Master Ava's orders, while Skuld has been trying to quell the fighting in an attempt to lessen the amount of members participating in the looming final battle. Sadly relenting that most wielders don't believe that the world is ending, Skuld also relays that the Dandelions are now worried about Master Ava's recent disappearance. Delegating to Chirithy's thoughts, the spirit suggests that Master Gula might know of the missing foreteller's whereabouts, as the two leaders were very close. Determined to get to the bottom of this ever-expanding discourse, the trio begins searching for an empty house in District 7 outside of the Foreteller's Tower, Chirithy passing on that Gula has been seen in the area. Entering the familiar warehouse players of the mobile game will be familiar with, alongside its appearance in back cover, presumably as the meeting place of Aced's failed alliance, the protagonists discover Gula and ask about Ava's whereabouts. The Leopard claims that nobody can change the upcoming apocalypse, be they Keyblade wielder, Dandelion, or Foreteller. Remarking that Skuld shares her just attitude with Ava, Guva claims that only the Master of Masters can prevent this incoming apocalypse, aligning with his desperate plan of summoning his missing master as seen in back cover using Kingdom Hearts. Further confirming events depicted in the accompanying film, Gula admits he and Ava were unsuccessful in finding the Master, following the one lead they had remaining, their fellow sixth apprentice Luciu, who would likely know where and why the Master vanished, dimmed, and faded without a trace. Chirithy confirms for the two Keyblade wielders that Master Luciu also followed suit shortly after the Master of Masters suddenly disappeared, Gula confirming that Ava's absence is due to her searching for the missing sixth apprentice. On the outskirts of Daybreak Town, we see that Ava has finally located Luciu, in where I assume is the same overlook that the Master of Masters had his conversations with Ira and back cover. Reiterating what we know from back cover, Luciu confirms his role is to watch the unfolding events from afar, the black-coated master intending to move on after the end of the world to help his master write the future in what will be and has been transcribed in the Book of Prophecies. Claiming Ava's wish to avoid the Keyblade War to be folly, Luciu brings up the lost page as well as their master's will. Claiming it is his role to inherit the Master's secrets, as he must survive the loss of the world as the Lost Page dictates, Luciu says the Master's purpose wasn't to prevent the war, but to simply watch Luciu's exploits afterwards, likely referencing the Gazing Eye and No Name. All checking out thanks to back cover, Ava then asks what is on the Lost Page, having heard about it from Gula months earlier. Wondering if this is Luciu's will and if he is the traitor, the black hooded member draws out his master's dark keyblade. Jumping back to the player, Gula then explains to his guests that the traitor is ultimately the reason why the war was inevitable, saying that this conflict is set to begin once the bell rings. Cutting back to Ava and Luciu, the foreteller clashes with the other master, the resulting shockwave rushing across Daybreak Town as the clock on the foreteller tower strikes, the bell ringing across the world and signaling the destined time. Gula then suggests that the two Keyblade wielders gather in their respective unions, claiming that they are all likely gathering for the war. Skull decides to return to the Dandelions, wishing the player wouldn't fight and should join her and by extension Ephemer when they leave to the outside world. As they depart, the other Charity calls them out, accusing the Dandelions of running away in an attempt to connect to the future. The Dark Charity reveals that its wielder is in fact the player, born from their darkness as it goes over the power bangles and focusing on the gameplay feature global players know as the special attack bonus. This was translated from the Japanese name for the feature, known as Guild, which is much more thematically relevant to the scene here. The Nightmare continues to elaborate that the bangles it gave to wielders gathered sins, and then transformed them into darkness that the Union members have used against the Heartless, changing the term from sin to guilt. A trio of Darklings appear to do battle with the player, followed up by the scene depicted in the opening to back cover, as the Dark Charity fuses with the three Heartless, transforming into the monstrous form of Nightmare Charity. In the aftermath of the battle, the defeated Charity claims that its connection to the player is now severed, claiming that it will disappear for now, hoping to meet them in another dream, as they fade into the darkness as we enter the final episode of Kingdom Hearts Key. The finale to the browser game had a bunch of smaller cuts to and from the player at the beginning of the Keyblade War, countless wielders present in the Badlands in the four corners of the screen accompanied by their foretellers. All 5 unions are present, including a vastly diminished Volps in the center of the crossroads, presumably since Ava's role of gathering dandelions had a major effect on her own union, as they supposedly are escaping to the world outside. The stage set for the hyped-up confrontation, the player is shown to have an inner monologue, reflecting on how they're no longer fighting monsters of darkness, but fellow friends from every union. Mentioning how the foreteller's words weren't even heard before the battle began, the player remains reluctant, motionless as other Keyblade wielders start charging each other as the storm brews above the battlefield. Things happening too quickly to completely process, the player is called out by a Sed near the start, beginning the first of a series of boss rushes. After remarking how he had earlier disqualified them, the Ursus leader nevertheless challenges the player, wishing to add their strength to his ultimate union. Complimenting their strength after their duel and standing up to him, Ased declares that he must now instead get rid of the player, their increased strength a possible threat to him. Pushing the player to the ground, Ira arrives just in time to prevent Ased from finishing them off, the two foretellers continuing to fight on their own. The player then faces off with Envy not too long after, who apologizes before turning her blade on them. While battling the snake, Envy praising Gula here, since he was Everglow's union leader in the footage, for having raised a fine Keyblade wielder, she walks off leaving the player exhausted as they watch the heart of a fallen wielder pass them by. Willing themselves to stand, the player then faces the imposing Ira, pushing them further towards their limit. Before their fight can finish, Ased attempts to cut off Ira's battle, claiming he's done waiting and wanting to rule over the world as its proper leader, fulfilling his role as given by the Master in back cover. The two men continue fighting elsewhere, the player out of breath as Keyblades begin falling across the Badlands, planting the future epitaphs we have seen in Birth by Sleep. The player eventually finds Ava, the Master raising a Keyblade much to the player's confusion, challenging them once more. Wishing for the player to leave with the Dandelions after their battle, they are left alone in the middle of the crossroads of abandoned Keyblades, exhausted and out of energy, collapsing to the ground as we skip over the climax for the time being. This is where Kingdom Hearts Key originally ended, but not before the expected secret ending that has much more relevance to global players' experiences. The special episode, titled Unchained 0, was shown right before the shutdown of Key in 2016 after Unchained Key had been out for almost a year in Japan. It shows flashes of the climactic events of the Keyblade War, even showing Ephemer and Skuld alongside Chirithy and the player as they reach out for them before their presumed end. Instead, the player awakens in Enchanted Dominion, a Disney world that wasn't present in the browser title, the Keyblade wielder confused as to what happened. Chirithy chimes in, asking if they were having that dream again, the spirit elaborating that after they were invited to join the Dandelions for Master Ava alongside Skuld, they talked with Skuld in the Fountain Plaza afterwards and ultimately declined the offer. Suggesting everything afterwards were recurring strange dreams, matching why I stopped right after that event in Unchained Key, and partially why events of Backcover didn't go beyond that moment in time, the player wonders how and why they woke up in a new world. Chirithy tries to bluff out of the conversation, its cute fluffy face lying to the player, and by extension the audience, as the Dream Eater notices giant black thorns blocking their progress forward. Turning back, they spot Diablo, mentioning how great it would be for them to have wings. The camera follows the Raven above the blockade to meet back up with its master, Maleficent. The Disney antagonist congratulates herself on traveling to this past version of her homeworld, confident that Sora and company cannot reach her here. The ever-present Reconnect Kingdom Hearts title appears, as Key ends on a very curious note for the audience, especially back in 2016. This now allows me to reconnect Kingdom Hearts Key, back cover, and now Unchained Key, which was now rebranded to Union Cross in April 2017. This is also going to be the bulk of this video's content, since this is where I'm selecting the actual plot developments that have been drip-fed to us over the last 2 years for your sanity, so let's do this. Switching back now over to Unchained Key, a lot more events begin to make sense. Between the importance of meeting with Master Ava and Skuld accepting the offer to join the Dandelions in quest number 555, none of the events described in the ending of Key occurs afterwards in the present, so to speak. The missions after back cover released consisted of exploring the Castle of Dreams as a new Disney world that wouldn't appear in Key, addressing nothing concerning the war. Everything's fluff until the 15 mission batch in quest 631 to 45, which arguably is still filler, but more importantly is the point in time where Unchained Key was rebranded as Union Cross as a Season 2 that clearly goes beyond the events of Key. I focus on this for a few reasons, mainly for some key details. First off, the player returns to Daybreak Town in response to the money-focused Moogle asking for assistance thanks to a giant shark-based Heartless, which has caused water damage and made a big hole down into the sewers below. The player meets up with a quartet of Keyblade wielders, bonding over the quest to take down ferocious Finns, which is the usual gameplay loop. At the end, the Moogle has repaired his store and makes note of how it feels like a brand new shop. Commentary on the rebranding to Union Cross, maybe? Outside, the player bonds with the Mad Scientist, the Pink Frog, the Moogle cosplayer, and the Lady Pirate as they leave for the day. Afterwards, Chirithy poofs back in, agreeing with the new friend's previous conversations based around the series' usual themes of teamwork and friendship. Adding that these two factors will eventually be the player's power, this section ends. Aside from the usual distractions that are occurring instead of depicting an apocalypse, it's worth mentioning that the missions begin in Daybreak Town during a storm, complete with rain and lightning. Could this possibly be a reference to the Keyblade War that was definitely happening in Key around this point in time, or am I simply looking too much into this? Later on, beginning in Quest 661, the group goes on sans Mooglehead, going after a new breed of Heartless before eventually ending up in the waterway leading into the Foreteller's Clock Tower. As a side note, all 4 of these characters are named Keyblade Wielder, except for Mog, and don't have actual names, which I find kind of odd. Anyways, having been told that it was forbidden by the Foretellers to enter, the Pink Frog goes in forward hunting down Heartless for a mission, followed by the players since they might remember having been there before, but ultimately nothing comes of this, even if they were lied to by Chirithy that everything prior was a dream. Cutting away during the missions, we are shown Ephemer meeting up in the Fated Land, which ends up being the Keyblade Graveyard, finally learning what happened to him and how he's in a quote unchained state. Remembering Master Ava's words of being joined by 4 others, Ephemer is met up by Skuld at the Desolate Crossroads, asking if she's the second to arrive at this place they've been to once before after the war. Right as they spot someone coming over, we cut back to the case of Ava as seen in back cover, when the Master of Masters gave Ava her role of creating the Dandelions to fly to another world and help rebuild the world after the Keyblade War. This conversation goes as expected, continuing with new information on how the Fox is to select 5 members of the elite group she's to gather to lead the 5 unions once they are the only ones left. When Ava asks if there's a need to keep the 5 unions, the Master suggests that they do, saying that they should pick up from all their hard work, as it's revealed that these 5 new union leaders are meant to be the only ones that will retain information on the end of the world. The Master wishes for the Dandelions to go on to a new world with a clean slate, so to speak, as he sees little point in having everyone harboring memories of an apocalypse. Asking her master how he can apparently wipe their memories, he then gives his apprentice a list of 5 names he suggests should be the new union leaders. One of these names is circled in red, the master saying that this member is to be given their own copy of the Book of Prophecies, the tome apparently needed to help shape the world into what it's meant to be. Ava mentions how risky this plan is, her master countering that it is only if the other 4 were to get their hands on it. So this new union leader is to receive a copy of the book in secret, which brings us back to Skuld and Ephemer greeting the 3rd leader, the camera keeping this character out of frame for a good while, milking the suspense for all it's worth, which is understandable since it's revealed to be none other than Ventus. No, I don't know, don't ask. As the player continues helping out their new group of friends since losing contact with Ephemer and Skuld, we cut back to the duo speaking with the player's Chirithy, feeling bad about lying to them, mentioning the player's been having recurring nightmares pertaining to the Keyblade War. Petting the spirit and commending its determination to help shield the player from remembering that tragedy, Skuld is pleased that the player is having new adventures with new friends. Saying that this is a perfect way to help bury sad memories deep within one's heart, Ephemer stands firm on having the dandelions mingle regardless of union, noting that this darkness in the world is different than the one they left. Bidding Chirithy farewell, Skuld asks Ephemer why he mentioned the darkness, not wishing to worry anyone at this time. Ephemer apologizes, feeling nervous on all events that didn't occur the same as in the previous world. Describing this new darkness as almost having a will of its own, Ephemer also mentions how this whole Union Cross feels off to him, despite Skuld mentioning it was in the rules that they were given. Mysterious. A flashback then shows Ava filling in Ephemer on his intended role, as well as being told everything about the upcoming apocalypse and how it cannot be prevented. Reacting in disbelief, he reacts with uncertainty about his role concerning masters and Union leaders as she hands him a green book. Lost in thought, he's brought back when Ven asks if Skuld and Ephemer know each other, curiously mentioning how he's always been alone. Skuld agreeing, the three apparently sharing that connection, they are soon joined by number 4, a boy whose eyes are obscured by a fedora and introducing himself as Brain. We're finally getting into the newness of Union Cross. Afterwards, the player's nightmares are soon seen, reenacting the beginning of the war and recalling the time they and Skuld tried to break up fights and their confrontation with Aced, incorporating the fight into Union Cross and catching up most players who didn't touch the original version of Key. The player wakes up in their room, asking if it was all really a dream, before cutting back to Ephemer being given the green rulebook from Ava for when they became Union leaders. Still trying to wrap his head around the entire concept, the foreteller tells Ephemer about transporting the dandelions to the other world soon once the Chosen Five have prepared it. When bringing up that the wielders will be made to forget the burden of the past strife, stating that the Chirithy will help make it happen thanks to their roles as Dream Eaters, Ephemer questions the decision. Countering that the past is what makes the future, Ava figured he would say that, wondering if he'd still keep his perspective were he there to witness the end. Returning back to the graveyard, Brain asks if Ephemer is the leader, who responds saying that nothing has been decided yet and that they should wait on the 5th member. Brain then asks if the rulebooks they were given are more guidelines than actual rules, Skuld adamant that they're set in stone. Commenting on how Skuld's the serious one, likening her to Master Ava, Ven and Ephemer agree with the comment, saying how Skuld recalls Master Gula previously stating the similarity. After a moment of levity, Brain asks if they should trust Ava's words, considering that they're being told to lie to the other dandelions about the truth, Ven agreeing that it doesn't sit well with him either. Ephemer once again recalls the recent past, finally swinging back to the aftermath of the Keyblade War, and thus the final episode of Key. The player is left exhausted in the center of the crossroads, hearts floating upwards and under the bright light of the true Kingdom Hearts, perhaps? Assuming that it's their time, the player is comforted by Chirithy and is met by both Skuld and Ephemer, the player reminding him that he was late in keeping their promise. Reaching out, the player accepts the gesture, the scene whiting out as Ephemer comes back to reality, so to speak, recalling Ava's words that if he'd want the wielders to recall such a tragedy. He agrees with Skuld in that rules are rules, rather wanting to shoulder the burden of the past themselves and sparing the others. Brain trusts Ephemer will, quote, lead them down the right path, while the other two agree, leaving the quartet to wait on the 5th before completely transitioning into this Union Cross. We now jump ahead through the story quest in the 700s, since this game is paced horrendously if you were waiting on narrative updates in real time during the wait between 0.2 and Kingdom Hearts 3. A few bits of non-Disney fluff occurs with the new group as they go off trying to enjoy a summer vacation, scheduled around the usual defeating of Heartless as the gang relax before we slip back into plot. The eponymous secret admirer here is introduced as the wallflower Strelitzia, a shy girl with a secret spot on a roof above the Fountain Plaza. Saying she's been fighting for 2 years, making friends and saying farewell to others during the time, she narrates the framing device of this section as directed towards the player. Having first seen them waiting on the fountain for someone all day, she began noticing them around after that, even though they must have crossed paths countless times within the last 2 years. She had wanted to introduce herself, but never found the courage, watching as the player began questioning their purpose and beginning to uncover the truth that they all weren't being told during previous big story events. Now, why are we following this shy girl? Turns out, we then learn that Strelitzia was a dandelion, and was one of the Chosen Five when Ava hands her a rulebook. In awe and reverence of her intended role as a new Union leader in her flower-filled room, she discusses with her Chirithy about how only the dandelions will survive the end while everyone else will disappear. Realizing that the player isn't a dandelion, Strelitzia begins pacing around her room, wanting to find them immediately, but unwilling to go out in the dark. Eventually going to sleep so that she can wake up early and recruit them in the morning, Chirithy expresses uncertainty at her goal, reminding her master Ava told her not to tell anyone about their secret. Strelitzia assures the spirit that she only intends to recruit the player into the dandelions and say nothing more, heading off to the Fountain Plaza the next morning waiting for the wielder she's admired from afar. Having spotted the player, Strelitzia runs off in the direction Chirithy pointed towards, eventually running across the empty warehouse that the player and Skuld met Master Gula in. Pitch black, the two are about to head back when nobody answers them when Strelitzia is attacked by an unseen figure in the darkness, striking her down and taking her rulebook. Still waiting on the fifth member, Brain asks how much longer they'll be, Ephemer and Skuld about to look around when they finally arrive. The four introduce themselves to another familiar-looking newcomer, introducing himself as Laurium as the logo for Union Cross finally appears. Continuing forward, the five now make their way to the clock tower, Skuld advising that they not touch anything while Brain counters that all of this is theirs now. Laurium seats himself at the round table asking what their next task is. Ephemer begins by stating they should wait on assigning Union leaders for now, Brain and Laurium finding the notion interesting. Ephemer is hesitant on segregating the wielders, Skuld agreeing that in order to avoid repeating the Keyblade War it must be done. When Brain brings up that the rules state that they should reinstate the unions, Laurium elaborates that while they say they are to assign Union leaders, it doesn't say when, Brain acknowledging the technicality. When asking Ventus what he thinks, the boy answers to Ephemer that he still feels uneasy leading a union, and will be much more at ease once they all agree on how to go about such an important matter. Ephemer further suggests that they keep the disappearance of the foretellers a secret from the other wielders for now, to avoid any chaos or confusion, Laurium agreeing and mentioning that the Keyblade wielders are now undergoing their training once again as planned. Skuld agreeing when he suggests that they should bring up the matter of the foretellers after their training is complete. Brain then brings over a book, convinced he has found their first task to celebrate their promotions, granting spirits to all the Keyblade wielders. Ven enthusiastically agrees, Laurium questioning what Brain means by companions, Brain elaborating that they'll be similar to Chirithy. While these spirits won't be as powerful as Chirithy, they can nevertheless devour nightmares, Skuld recalling the player suffering those very nightmares of the Keyblade War, Ephemer connecting the dots and having the spirits help the wielders to forget the past. While Brain and Laurium begin preparations on an archetype for the Dream Eaters, Ephemer, Skuld, and Ven set out in search for the materials needed for their first task, remarking how this can take some time. This eventually leads the player gaining their own spirit after another Chirithy plucks some hair from their Chirithy. This spirit can be customized and everything as said earlier. Don't have much more to say on this, but they weren't kidding when they said this may take some time, because it would be a long while until we got anything substantial in terms of narrative. As of this video's publishing date, this is as far as Global's gotten in the actual relevant plot, right on the eve of Kingdom Hearts 3's release, which is still annoying to me when there's no excuse how they couldn't have caught us up by now. So from here on out, we're delving into translations of the most recent Japanese story quests, which have been staggered out for months now, so apologies if some of these terms don't match the eventual localizations. Never fear, I will naturally do another video on whatever Union Cross becomes, if it rebrands again or ends before the next main installment after Kingdom Hearts 3. This drip feed of plot has angered a lot of fans online, and I know I'm the only one in my circle of friends who's actually has stuck with the game this long, even knowing that we aren't caught up with what's finally getting interesting in the plot that we won't receive until weeks after Kingdom Hearts 3 is out. Without further ado, let's dive into the juicy bits and wrap up this video. No lie, it takes over 100 quests until the plot finally kicks back into full gear in any major capacity that isn't wrapping up Disney worlds. Beginning in quest 841 in batches of 5, the player will have experience and wrap up Enchanted Dominion, including defeating Maleficent and having her visit it and quickly checking up on the Disney worlds. Not a lot going on until we finally fire Chekhov's gun after loading it all the way back at the end of Key. We see the aftermath of Enchanted Dominion and how the Dark Fairy is cursing herself for not being able to change the ending, as she puts it. This is where it gets interesting. A mysterious entity in the shadows arrives to clarify that it is because Maleficent knows she's from the future. Demanding to know who is addressing her, the guest addresses itself vaguely as darkness, and traveling through time isn't something that they can do. It lays bare Maleficent's intentions. She planned on rewriting the past by undoing her own defeat and gathering the 7 pure lights, the antagonist remaining silent throughout. The Unknown continues by reiterating the rules of time travel, how you must separate your heart from your body, leaving it behind in order to visit a period in time in where you already exist. It reveals to the audience that Maleficent traveled through time using a pivotal moment from the first Kingdom Hearts. When Riku was possessed by Ansem and was stabbed by the Keyblade of Heart he was wielding, she had remembered the laws of time travel as told to her by Master Xehanort in the past. Maleficent flippantly retorts that this is dull, admitting the so-called darkness has seen through her scheme. The mysterious entity further confirms that since she took advantage of time travel, of course the Master knew of her futile attempt to change the past. It continues that this is because in the real world before the Keyblade War, she hadn't yet created Enchanted Dominion. The various Keyblade wielders had defeated Heartless and been gathering Lux via worlds from the future thanks to the Book of Prophecies. After the Keyblade War, the Foretellers and Master disappeared while the lingering sadness of lost Keyblade wielders became the tales that would be told in the future. But therein lies the problem. In the absence of the Master and the Foretellers, the Book of Prophecies doesn't have the power to draw out worlds anymore. In response, data from these worlds were created, written beforehand, and thus cannot be rewritten, meaning Maleficent's actions were doomed to fail from the start. Repeating that this is dull, she realized that this isn't the real world, the darkness revealing that they are indeed in a data recreation of her world. Asking if she is now trapped here because the Unknown Finger feared her power, it tells Maleficent that it doesn't fear her power, it's her knowledge of the future. Because the evil fairy's memories can cause paradoxes, the darkness says it purposefully left out one of the worlds that housed the 7th pure light. While Maleficent wonders if this darkness plans on keeping her trapped in this data, it responds that it has no intention of leaving her here, and would rather have Maleficent return to her own time. Saying that she cannot go through time while in this world, the entity reveals that there is a way to send her back to the future from here, the scene trailing off on that cliffhanger with many questions thanks to these revelations. Returning to the clock tower, Ephemer has summoned the others, Van asking about Lorien's absence. Brain speaks up for the absent number 4, saying that he told him that he would agree with whatever Ephemer's decision is, remarking that's what Lorien told him and that he appears to trust their leader. Ephemer denies this, saying that they're all leaders and will continue on the reason he's called them here. Having read the rulebooks, Ephemer addresses this so-called shift pride, and how it appears to showcase having Keyblade wielders fight each other, something Ven seems to react in shock towards. This is essentially referring in-game to the PvP, and even though Brain says it's a rule, Ven is vehemently against the concept, not wanting to see Keyblade wielders raising their swords on each other, even if it is a game of sorts. Skull thinks back on the clash that she and the player attempted to stop before more were so willing to enter a war, deciding that she is also against the idea. Pointing out that Ephemer is the deciding vote, being Brain's 1 yay versus the 2 nays, Ephemer ultimately agrees that they should follow the rules, adding Lorien's vote to instigate the shift pride. As Brain begins to leave, Ephemer asks him to wait a moment, clarifying that while he is willing to follow the rules, he doesn't want the Keyblade wielders to actually fight one another. Reaffirming that they are all reconstructed as data in this other world where the Dandelions now reside, there are thus copies of everyone's data, suggesting that they can fight in the data of the Keyblade War, allowing them to vet out any frustrations without actually facing one another and technically following the rules and allowing the Keyblade wielders to compete against one another. Brain brings up that this was a well thought out plan, which is unusual for Ephemer, laughter rippling through the quartet. Ephemer actually gives credit to Lorien, recounting a conversation they had a few days earlier on the topic of shift pride, noticing Ephemer was running himself ragged, stressing out over the idea of Keyblade wielders having to face each other, to which Lorien suggests that he just take a break, relaxing Ephemer and causing him to crack a smile. Noticing Lorien's leaving, Ephemer asks where he's going. The pink-haired leader replies that the Dandelions are repeating events since the Keyblade War ended as data. Lorien intends to search through the data and find a member that should be a Dandelion but whom he hasn't seen yet. When Ephemer volunteers to join him, Lorien politely declines, suggesting this is a personal matter anyway and begins to search alone. Returning from the flashback, Brain suggests they not pry into Lauriam's personal affairs, the others agreeing while still being curious. Ephemer suggests how Lauriam's search through the data of the Keyblade wielders led to giving him the idea that using the same data to have the Dandelions fight each other safely. In the data version of Daybreak Town, where the Dandelions are reliving the past, Lauriam is seen approaching a familiar blonde girl with distinctive hair, addressing her as Elrena. Confirming this, he then begins by wanting to ask about his sister, Strelitzia. After filling Elrena in on how his sister's gone missing, Lauriam says that while Strelitzia doesn't speak to him much, he did hear that she and Elrena had often been in the same party multiple times, which led him here now. Agreeing that Strelitzia was often alone, Elrena says that they weren't really friends, considering the only time they ever spoke was about their missions. Lauriam recounts that his sister was hesitant about joining the Dandelions, and it seemed that she was finally willing to join before he had last seen her. Elrena adds that she once saw her waiting for someone in the Fountain Plaza, reaffirming that she often saw Strelitzia on the rooftop overlooking the same area, recalling Master Ava's speech that she gave to them about how the unions were to fight each other soon. Elrena says that while nothing came of that speech, it was around the last time she saw Strelitzia. Thinking to himself, Lauriam runs through Elrena's account. If she doesn't recall any conflicts afterwards, then she cannot remember the Keyblade War, and is fairly confident that his sister didn't participate. Wishing she can help further, Elrena suddenly gets an idea. Calling her Chirithy, she asks if it was friends with Strelitzia's Chirithy, confirming it was and asking why a union leader is also wondering. Filling it in on Lauriam being Strelitzia's brother, the Chirithy recalls the last they saw her was that she was waiting for someone, causing Lauriam to wonder about this mysterious person his sister was worried about. Questioning why the Chirithy doesn't know this person's name, the Chirithy responds that they didn't speak much, but apparently had joined the Dandelions. Lauriam asks if it saw her last after the bell rang, Chirithy replying it was before, leading Lauriam to confirm that she was not seen before the Keyblade War, meaning that this someone is the key to his sister's disappearance. The Chirithy elaborates that it saw her go into the empty house nearby before mentioning Scold, grabbing Lauriam's attention. Asking them to let him know if they remember anything else, he leaves the duo. Elrena's curiosity leads her to enter the empty house, causing her Chirithy to ponder aloud why she's so interested in someone else. Returning to the Foreteller's chambers, Lauriam gets right to the point on picking Skull's brain, asking her what she knows about his sister. Wishing she could help further, Lauriam waves away Skull's concern, saying his sibling was a kind soul who would always chase after her those that she worried about. Sadly accepting that she may have been in the Keyblade War, Brain interjects, saying if Strelitzia was trying to recruit someone before the bell rang, then it means this person didn't join before then. If this is the case, and Strelitzia supposedly ended up a Dandelion despite her hesitation, then she would have been at the Fountain Plaza when Ava gave her speech and wouldn't have missed them. Thus, this someone would have likely fought in the Keyblade War, Brain further suggesting that Strelitzia likely joined the Dandelions with the intention of recruiting this someone as well. With all of this out in the open, Ephemer actually has a suggestion given all the evidence. A quiet person who was hesitant on joining with the Dandelions has Scold also thinking of the player. And that was everything we got on the plot when I wrote the majority of the script. Now I enter a meaty lore and scenarios mystery section given all the recent information given to us, finally delivering some payoffs to the narrative Key began over half a decade ago. First off, a reminder that series director Tetsuro Nomura has confirmed that the Master of Masters can create Keyblades from the depths of another's heart. This has helped a bit gameplay-wise with how Keyblades can begin smaller on familiar-looking swords, but can eventually reach the form they were seen at in other games. It's a nice touch that's been shown during a few of the protagonist dives to the heart, is where they were given the power to use the Keyblade, including Sora's memorable opening tutorial in the first Kingdom Hearts, so I like the reincorporation there. As a side note, I am not bringing this information into the limelight to excuse any holes in the plot so far. While I always appreciate the interviews in the Ultimania guides that usually has Nomura elaborating on more subtle plot points and divulging interesting bits of lore, character motivations, and current mysteries, anything important he says in interviews should always be delving into scenes shown in the games themselves. One shouldn't rely on outside material, in this case interviews post-game release, to help make sense of anything pivotal in the actual games. I generally think we've avoided this barring the madness Key has been. His interviews have helped make crystal clear certain events that the games don't explicitly cover, but they are more supplemental material to help give deeper meaning to subtext present in events portrayed in-game. And in this case, Key hasn't gotten any major Ultimania guide or interviews that aren't related to other titles, so I don't have much to share in this area beyond the fact that the Master can pull Keyblades from the hearts of others, but given how vague Keyblades have generally been anyways, this doesn't really contradict or add too much answers to an already vague topic. And seeing how Union Cross is still ongoing, I don't have any bombshells to drop from the Word of God for this video. In the meantime, I can address a few mysteries I have noticed and curiosities the fanbase has going for them on the eve of the Darkseeker Saga's finale. So now we get to the more meaty aspects of how the original key relates to Unchained Key / Union Cross. The events in Unchained Key suggested players trust Ephemer's hunch that they were visiting projections of worlds, and later entering an unchained state outside of their world. Turns out that the first few hundred story quests were the Dandelions reliving the past in a data version of the worlds, dare I say datascape? Is Nomura trying to punish those who consider Recoded worthless? Is this one of the vital connections and biggest wrenches thrown into the mix as the core of this game's confusion? Moving on a bit, the events in Key were the actual history of the player character gathering light for a union, meeting up with Ephemer and Scold, and learning that there was an upcoming apocalypse that they were trying to prevent and or avoid. Eventually ending up in the climactic battle, the player was then set into a data version of the various worlds from the future they had visited, beginning to relive past events and explaining why both the eponymous Keyblade didn't show up, why the Keyblade War never occurred on screen in Unchained Key, and partially why back cover didn't show the conflict. It was used as the climax of Key, which is something most Kingdom Hearts fans will not have experienced firsthand. Something to say for the future, perhaps? So to clear this up as best I can, Kingdom Hearts Key is depicting the actual events of the approximate 2-year lead-up to the Keyblade War as experienced by the player. Back cover is thus also depicting behind-the-scenes events from the foreteller's perspectives. Unchained Key is, in reality, a sequel to both, even though I consider it the 8th game in the series alongside Key, with back cover as the 9th installment, which doesn't help clarifying matters much. While it is technically a sequel, Unchained Key, now Union Cross, has covered quite a bit of the original game's events in the story and bosses, framed as resurfaced nightmares that the player is experiencing, which is a step in the right direction for catching up fans, most of which will have never touched the original browser game. Is that all cleared up? Hopefully, because this is about to get more complicated again. While Key and back cover was in the real world before it was fragmented post-war, as the various unions had their wielders visiting light from future worlds and bestowing them powers from the same future, it's implied the union leaders were sent to another world, where the Dandelions were then further sent into a data version of these worlds, since the loss of the Master and his apprentices rendered the Book of Prophecy powerless. And the Nightmare Chirithy mentions it hopes to see the player in another dream. So are we actually in the realm of sleep, which would explain the Chirithy? Or is this outside world in the realm of sleep, in a dream, and they have a datascape inside of a dream world, Dreamception style? Speaking of the book, one of the new Union leaders has a working copy of the tome, though it is currently unclear who that is, as well as who is presumably responsible with murdering Strelitzia, who is meant to be one of the Chosen Five, and the fanbase has had a field day trying to plant the finger on who done it. I've personally enjoyed the Kingdom Hearts rendition of Clue, even if it took way too long to get to this point. Those of us who are caught up have been enjoying the developments since things are actually happening again. Admittedly, the most recent story bits have transpired without the player's involvement, but dang it, I'll take anything we can get. Of course, I would be remiss to not address the very curious inclusion of 4 specific returning characters. First of all, Ventus. How exactly he's here is a mystery, since Nomura has confirmed that this is indeed the real Ven we're all familiar with from Birth by Sleep, which likely holds the clue from the 5th and 7th entries. If Ven's heart is sleeping, is it too much of a stretch thinking he may have access to the realm of sleep? Because, if the Chirithy are Dream Eaters, and the pets are explicitly spirits to prevent nightmares and eat the bad dreams of the Keyblade War, then are we somehow both in the realm of sleep and the datascape now? Both two aspects of the lore that are infamously confusing to newcomers and even diehard fans to comprehend, myself included. More to the point, when and how is Ven here? Ven was originally from the Age of Fairy Tales, and that's why Master Xehanort selected him as a pupil for a possible vessel and then later a means to hastily create the Keyblade thanks to being there? If that sounds too crazy, then did Ven enter the realm of sleep at some point after his story in Birth by Sleep, when his heart was sleeping within Sora? Was it something that he was able to do after Sora stabbed himself with the Keyblade of Heart, when he freed Kyrie's heart, and when Ven's went to help form Roxas? Ven is seen smiling at the end of 3D when Sora was thanking his Dream Eater friends, so does he have experience with them thanks to Chirithy instead of an inside Sora's heart account? It's hard to say right now. Because the Master is said to have created the Chirithy, who is a spirit. In the Age of Fairy Tales, there was no distinction between the wider world when it was whole and apparently the dreaming world since no worlds were sleeping yet. The Master's powers are frustratingly vague, as are all the foretellers to be honest, since Key's story is intent on stringing us along as a gacha-style game, drip-feeding its content every few months at a time. And I do mean actual plot developments I've gone over. I've skipped over the majority of the 855 missions I have covered here, because it's all either fluffy, game-grindy filler, or a Disney scenario which is more appreciated, but the content is stretched so thin that it really does wear thin if you stay up to date on this game. Heck, I actually stopped playing this for a while, signing in every few weeks when I remembered once 2.8 released in the beginning of 2017 for the daily login bonuses for free jewels. It wasn't until I began this project in earnest back in March of 2018, inspired by the 16th anniversary of the Japanese release of the first Kingdom Hearts, and with E3 coming up then with promises of a release date for Kingdom Hearts 3, I decided to hedge my bets and begin reviewing/covering the gameplay and story of this insane series. Between script writing, playing, recording, editing, and uploading my playthroughs and these retrospectives, I began catching up on Union Cross, meaning I had roughly 200 missions to get through during the last 10 months, since I was keeping tabs on the Japanese updates, being around half a year ahead of Global for no other reason than for Square Enix North American brands to milk us when the game is otherwise caught up in virtually every other aspect. No, I won't quite get over that when I know Global fans would love knowing about Lauriam and Elrena considering Kingdom Hearts 3. Speaking of which, many of you may have already figured this out, but let me spell it out for you. Rearrange the names Lauriam and Elrena and add an ever-present X in them, and you'll get who's these two characters look like. The two traders themselves, Marluxia and Larxene from Chain of Memories fame. Of course, these are presumably their somebodies, which means if they're both dandelions, then they were both Keyblade wielders once upon a time. Puts their whole plan on making Sora their puppet into some perspective, doesn't it? Just like Xemnas, my mind wanders on why they can't wield the Keyblade, or maybe chose not to. It gets cagey on the subject. If Marluxia and Larxene could have wielded the Keyblade, then they wouldn't have needed to use Roxas in the organization or wanted Sora so badly in Castle Oblivion, but Xemnas might be choosing not to if you ask Nomura. Let's gloss over this for now because my brain's hurting again. Because young Xehanort had an exchange with Riku near the end of Dream Drop Distance concerning the Keyblade during Riku's side of Symphony of Sorcery. There, it was discussed that the Keyblade had originally chosen Riku after Terra bequeathed him the power a decade ago on Destiny Islands. When the door to their world was flung open and had been found by the Heartless, Riku was passed over by the Keyblade in that instance when his heart embraced the darkness he couldn't fully control, so it moved down the list to Sora, who had a Keyblade wielder within him which allowed Sora's use of the Keyblade thanks to Ventus' sleeping dick within his heart. So does the amount of darkness prevent you from wielding the Keyblade? Not necessarily, since Terra Xehanort has been seen wielding No Name before, but this is an aspect of the lore that isn't really clear to this day, because that could just be a byproduct of Xehanort's heart possessing someone else. Xehanort has clearly embraced the power of darkness, as did Riku, and both have wielded the Keyblade since. Heck, Keyblades are separated into those of light and darkness anyway, but that doesn't mean they're exclusive to either. It simply designates where they were found, or quote, forged, not what determines who can wield them. While Sora gained the Kingdom Key in the Realm of Light, and has been using it ever since, Mickey's used the Kingdom Key D, which is a Keyblade from the Realm of Darkness as seen in 0.2, but otherwise there's not much difference between the inverse colored weapons. So how and why Xemnas, Marluxia, and Larxene can't or won't use Keyblades is a mystery for now. And what conditions you need to wield one, be they the state of your heart or something else entirely, since nobodies can gain hearts stated by 3D, so keep that on the back burner for now, I guess. Moving on to the Secret Admirer, when Strelitzia was introduced, many were wondering what her purpose was beyond a character many players of Union Cross grew attached to in such a short time, which has then since been given the crux of the current storyline involving Lauriam, whom many were already on edge about, having recognized the person who would become the graceful assassin, which is likely the reaction that Nomura wanted before throwing this curveball to us. Not too surprising, since Strelitzia is another name for a bird of paradise, which is a type of flower, mirroring the theme Marluxia is known for with his pink petal motif around death. Makes you look at his third form nobody familiar in Chain of Memories with more scrutiny, since it does resemble a girl with some similar physical similarities with Strelitzia if you squint hard enough. Have I said I have a habit of looking too much into this sort of thing? As far as characterization goes, both Lauriam and Elrena act like normal human beings, a far cry from the manipulative and sadistic duo many loved for those very traits back when they were mentally messing with existential adolescents and replicas. Thus, many like to turn an eye to the one who doesn't show his eyes as a potential candidate to our current session of Who Killed Strelitzia regarding Clue, Kingdom Hearts Edition. That is, of course, Brain, a character we know next to nothing about compared to the other four new Union leaders, who has hair similar to Ienzo/Zexion if you're asking about my first impressions here. Of course, we actually have seen his face pretty clearly, considering he and the others are currently on the title screen of Union Cross as of this video's publishing date, alongside a mysterious hooded member who remains unnamed at this point in time. If you ask me, I'm leaning towards Strelitzia, perhaps a shell of her former self. This is only because it would mirror her dapper brother across from him holding a dandelion, while the hooded figure looks feminine to me, as well as holding a flower which I believe is commonly known as a bleeding heart vine, which I admit is a large part of why I think this may be our fallen wielder. Pays to look into things and research names, huh? But that still leaves the murder mystery going right before Kingdom Hearts 3 drops, and the connection Key has to that game will likely have a more definitive answer once this video is published, if we're lucky. But as for me recording this, I don't have the answers. You've caught up to the limit of my knowledge and speculation given the currently released games and updates. For what it's worth, I believe Brain isn't telling the complete truth to us, and not only because his eyes are covered by some hair and a fedora, but that I have a suspicion he may be a character we have already been introduced to. Remember, we don't know what the Master or his 6 apprentices look like beneath their black coats and animal hoods, so color me suspicious since we also don't know what anyone sounds like aside from Ephemer. While we do know what Ven, Lorium, and Arena can sound like, Scold wasn't seen in back cover, and thus we don't have an official voice actress yet alongside Brain and Strelitzia. There are many places my mind wanders to on the off time between these long updates of this game. Which then brings me to Maleficent, tying this back to the Disney element before I begin wrapping this section up. Given her suspecting of connection between the Datascape, the Book of Prophecies, and Jiminy's Journal, is it possible Maleficent may have gotten her wish earlier than she expected? If she went back in time presumably between her death and resurrection during the events of Chain of Memories, then the Dark Fairy was likely unamused being sent back to a digital version of a world whose story was already written and set in stone. This obviously brings us to the so-called darkness that didn't want her here and couldn't travel through time itself, but knew of a way to get Maleficent out of the data worlds and back into her own time. This unknown entity may be the same darkness that Ephemer was sensing earlier, or it could be any character we have or haven't seen thus far, like maybe the Murderer, so who knows how far that'll be paid off. Because this mysterious figure definitely knows about the Master of Masters, Xehanort, and the whole time travel shenanigans, as did Xehanort at some point, or Ansem Seeker of Darkness, but you get my meaning. It also acts as if it specifically excluded what I assume to be Radiant Garden / Hollow Bastion from what I'm just calling the Datascape for now in an effort to prevent Maleficent from causing a similar ruckus if I'm understanding the translations correctly. There's a lot of pieces on the board here, but not much in terms of payoff at the moment, and this is simply one of them. I'm expecting Maleficent to recall, however faintly, the events of her stint in the data simulation of her world here, especially if that's what's helped her link everything together in the search for the Book of Prophecies to conquer the worlds. Or that black box. That has understandably gone unmentioned since, as far as we know, only the Master and Lucio know of its existence, and whatever that key super atop its 13 blocks ultimately mean is saved for Kingdom Hearts 3. As far as the little bits and bobs go, back in December 2018, Union Cross was updated with a preview of a feature showcasing a selection of special themed minigames that will be showing up in Kingdom Hearts 3. The edition, known as X-Tres, maybe a play on extras, while making that X stand for now Key, Cross, and finally X, allows players access to Classic Kingdom. Without spoiling too much considering that this is mainly a Union Cross video, Classic Kingdom's inclusion in Kingdom Hearts 3 is contextualized as an LCD handheld reminiscent of the old Nintendo Game & Watch handhelds that preceded the Game Boy, which most will now recognize from Super Smash Bros. As Mr. Game & Watch's origin series. This handheld device is given to Sora in Kingdom Hearts 3 as a means to give some retro love towards these old style of games, and is replicated in X-Trace, showing 5 of the 20 expected minigames. Limited in controls, the player is meant to play them to accumulate to a specific score, the requirement of which was halved in January 2019 in preparation for Kingdom Hearts 3, since the preview came along with an incentive for those of us who are playing Union Cross. If you played the games enough to reach the required scores across all 5 minigames, a code was given out that give players access to the Keyblade of Key, Starlight. Yes, we've now hit actual DLC in Kingdom Hearts, and I hope that doesn't make a habit of this sort of thing. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy that the bonus incentive for having stuck around the free-to-play game for this long, but that's with the caveat that Starlight should be accessible in Kingdom Hearts 3 through normal gameplay. We're just getting it earlier. I will no doubt address this further in the upcoming 11th video planned for March 28th, 2019, 2 months from this video's publishing date, but let's just say I'm keeping an eye open on this undesirable aspect of gaming creeping into my beloved Kingdom Hearts. And I just realized something. I never detailed what Union Cross actually is. If the game didn't make it clear, Union Cross refers to the unification of all 5 unions that the Dandelions are made up from. This was done to prevent the Keyblade War from occurring once more, and explains why the Chosen 5 are ultimately delaying sorting everyone back into unions as it allows them to discuss the matter further. While not everyone's in total agreement, everyone's followed along with it so far, and the game itself still operates under the unions for weekly rankings, so this is more of a story change at the moment. So this Union Cross is about the unification the Dandelions represent. I would have kicked myself to forget to mention this detail in this particular video. There's not much else for me to say on this part 2 dealing with Key and Union Cross, but I like to be thorough in my coverage. I feel even if one aspect of what I've covered in this video shows up in some way in Kingdom Hearts 3, then it will have been worth my time splitting the story into 2 videos so far. There will be a third follow-up in the future, since right before publishing this I was assuming we'd have at least one last-minute story update in Japan before they received Kingdom Hearts 3, but we're now getting it next week after Kingdom Hearts 3 is out globally. Not only that, but we're also getting the next segment of the murder mystery on the same day we get the secret ending for Kingdom Hearts 3, at least in Japan, and it's focused on Brain, so let's just say that those of us who are caught up are very interested in the timing here. I'll elaborate more on it next time, but for now this is all I've got for this video. Apologies for it being anticlimactic, but we are caught up to everything related to Kingdom Hearts as of January 25th, 2019. This will hopefully give everyone some insight into any reference, large or small, that will appear in Kingdom Hearts 3. I cannot guarantee how much anything here will show up since I've avoided all spoilers for the game thus far, plus the epilogue and secret endings aren't yet available even on the leaked copies since the discs weren't printed with them on it, which was honestly kind of a great move for spoilers. More on this in the next video, you can count on that. But as for Union Cross, we put a pause on this for now. Who killed Strelitzia will have to wait, as this is my cutoff point. I assume the outcomes of this will not be addressed explicitly in Kingdom Hearts 3, but we'll continue on with Brain and whatever else Union Cross has in store for us over the next few months. The story around Key is obviously setting us up for what lies beyond the Keyblade War, and thus Xehanort, so we will pick this back up sometime in the future once it's already been written. Next time, the light is gathering together, hearts driven by one oath, one purpose. So for those watching this in January 2019, I'll see you guys in 2 months for my in-depth video on Kingdom Hearts 3 to cap off this video series on the Dark Seeker saga. Enjoy my no doubt fuzzy and or choppy initial stream next week and later proper pretty videos in March, but if you're watching this past March 28th, 2019, then you could hear my thoughts on the long-awaited sequel right now. I'll see you then, and may your heart be your guiding key as we finally awaken the next whole number.